Hi everyone, Ollie here from IT Career Helper, and today we're going to be talking about the AZ-140 exam, and I'm just going to be sharing some of my closing thoughts after taking the exam, studying for the exam. I'm going to go through what's covered and how I prepared, and just talk a little bit about the exam itself and how I feel it went, how I feel I could have better prepared, and hopefully give you some information on how you can pass the exam. Now, I'll start off by saying I'm not going to give any spoilers for the exam. I'm not going to talk about exam content. I'm not going to talk about exam questions, and all of the information in this video is freely available online if you look for it. So Microsoft, please don't ban me. I'm not giving out any secrets. So I'm just on the exam website here. This is on the Microsoft Learn website, and we've got the overview of the exam. It's all sort of standard stuff. There's a course with this self-paced Microsoft Learn stuff. I haven't done that course. Most of my prep was practice questions through Measure Up and also just labbing everything. I do a lot of AVD day to day at work, so I'm pretty familiar with the concepts. I've done a lot of builds and I do a fair bit of support for it, so nothing on there was particularly out of the ordinary. I think if you've worked for AVD, you've done 2 or 3 environment builds, you're probably going to be able to pass the exam without too much trouble. Something else I'm going to go into as well is you now have Microsoft Learn access in the exams. So this is the first exam I've taken since they brought that in, and I found it very, very useful. There were a few questions which came up which I didn't feel were covered in the syllabus or in the sort of prep material that Microsoft give out, but they were sort of specific enough that I could type the command or type the information into Microsoft Learn during the exam and look the answer up that way. So I think it's worth familiarising yourself with the Learn website if you don't use it a lot. I mean, you should be if you're in IT. Basically, you just get access to this page and you can type whatever you want into the search box and generally get the Learn article up about it. It's worth noting that you don't get access to any community articles, so if someone's posted a question in like a thread, you won't be able to access that thread, you'll get blocked, but you can access just sort of standard documentation. So if you type Visual Virtual Desktop into there, you can get the full sort of documentation of how everything works. And if you're getting specific questions around what certain storage accounts can do or anything like that, you can just bash the question basically into Learn and go and look the answer up. I think that's good and bad. I found that I was second guessing a lot of stuff that I definitely knew and I was looking it up anyway just because I could, which obviously ate into my time, but I still finished the exam with plenty of time left and I got a decent score. I got 880 or something, 884 I think. Pass is 700, so it's a pretty solid. It's probably one of my higher Microsoft exam passes, to be honest, and I think that's because of the Learn access in the exam. So don't stress about memorising every little detail. Previously you may have had to memorise specific numbers and things like that. All that kind of stuff you can look up during the exam. Obviously, if you know it, then great, but there is a panic button now, which is good and bad for different reasons. So Microsoft study material has actually come a long way. Really gone are the days that you need to be buying measure ups and paying for things like Pluralsight or CBT Nuggets. Microsoft provide pretty much everything for you, instructor led, and it's really, really good. So all I'm going to do is on the AZ-140 page here, I'm just going to hit the certification, which is the Virtual Desktop Specialty, and on here we get a little exam overview, we get a prepare thing with the course that we just looked at, and then we also get a practice assessment and a sandbox here. So we'll come to those in a minute. There's also a study guide which you can Google, which is on Microsoft Learn under the study guide section. You get them for pretty much all the exams. I think have a study guide these days, and this is what used to be the exam page. So it gives you a full link of useful stuff. It gives you those labs and practice tests and all that kind of stuff. It tells you about updates. Now, as of April 22nd, which was a few days ago when I'm recording this video, there has been a change to the exam, so that it's slightly different to how it was when I took it. I took it a few weeks ago, but for the most part, not a lot has changed. So, as with any Microsoft exam, you have a number of sections which are worth different percentages. So these are the sort of weightings of how many questions you'll get around those subjects. So plan and implement is the biggest one, 40 to 45% of the test. If you can smash plan and implement, and also plan and implement the user environments and apps, you can pick up sort of 60-70% of the exam just off those two sections. So focus your sort of study accordingly on the bigger sections of the exam. So under plan and implement, we've got things like assessment, so you're going to need to know the difference between the Azure Experience Estimator, which is for sort of testing how AVD is going to perform in certain locations, that kind of thing, versus things like Azure Advisor for looking at how your environment is performing and getting recommendations. There's questions around network requirements, so again, things like Azure Network Watcher. The plan and implement the network connectivity, you're going to need to know about VNets, about peering, about routing. There might be questions around firewalls and VPNs, so when would you use a point-to-site VPN, when would you use a site-to-site VPN, things like that. There's connectivity to the internet on-prem, so that's the VPN question, basically. I'd expect to see things like you're trying to get from your AVD environment to a server in a different VNet. What do? You peer the VNets. You're trying to get from your AVD environment to a server on-prem. What do? Site-to-site VPN. Things like that are going to be relevant around here, and that's the kind of thing that I'd expect to see based on these points here. Short path and quality of service, I don't think I saw much of that, to be completely honest. There probably are going to be questions around short path, or there could be questions around short path, but certainly quality of service I don't remember seeing a great deal about, so this could be certainly quality of service could be a new point for the exam since April. RDP short path is an interesting one, which basically, if you see a question about stability and performance, short path is likely the answer on that. Private link, again, I think that may be a new point in the exam. Didn't see much of that, but you're going to need an understanding of Azure DNS and of DNS in general for questions like that. There's definitely There's definitely subjects around things like private endpoints and DNS resolution to private endpoints, so familiarise yourself with that. Oh, and there we go. There's the DNS question. So yeah, that's relevant. Monitor and troubleshoot network connectivity again. So just be familiar with things like log analytic workspaces and how you can monitor and manage your AVD environment through things like that. So looking at the storage, this is a smaller part of the exam, isn't it? Oh no, that's still under plan and implement. So we still have to. I see why this is such a big section now. You've got storage, host pool, session host. There's a lot in there. So there's a lot of FS Logics is a big thing. Profile storage. So definitely familiarise yourself with that. What does the FS Logics app do when it's installed on the session hosts? How do you configure FS Logics? What sort of permissions are needed on the storage account and on the file share within the storage account? So you need your Azure permissions, so know the difference between a share contributor and an elevated share contributor in Azure. Know the difference between that permission and the actual NTFS permissions that are applied to the file share. All of that's important, and that's the kind of thing they can test on, because questions can trip you up if you answer elevated contributor for an NTFS question, for example. Question around storage accounts, so again that's likely going to be things like, what type of storage account do you need for this scenario, what type of storage account do you need for this scenario. all stuff that you can look up on Microsoft Learn during the exam if you get absolutely stuck with it. And file shares, again, similar kind of thing. NetApp is an interesting one. It's something that I've never used professionally. I've talked to a couple of friends who've also sat the exam, and they said, why Microsoft testing on NetApp? It's not something that we really deploy. If you work for a massive company, it might be relevant, but you just need to know how to configure it. Think of it as a vSAN. So it's basically a vSAN. So you would get your storage, provision a LUN or a pool, I think they call it, and then put your share on top of that, and then configure the share. So it's essentially just a traditional SAN in the cloud. Plan host pools and session hosts. So this is resource groups, subscriptions management groups. So questions around budgeting, around whether you would use a resource group or a management group to do different things. I don't think that's particularly heavily tested, to be honest. I've not seen a lot of practice questions about it out and about on the measure ups and on the Microsoft practice assessment. Recommend an operating system. So, are you going to have a pooled or a private sort of deployment? So are people going to have personal session hosts, or are they going to have a scaling? Are you going to go depth first? Are you going to go breadth first? All that kind of thing is going to be relevant to the OS question. Certain operating systems you can have as a generalized pool, some you cannot. You'd need to know when you're going to use a server OS, when you're going to use a client OS, all that kind of stuff, and licensing as well. So what sort of activation are you going to use? What sort of licensing are you going to use? Which 365 licenses include AVD licensing? How are you going to license the hosts? Do you have benefit where you've got your on-prem licensing? All that kind of stuff is going to be relevant there. And how you actually license the images. So, if you deploy an image from the gallery, does it come with a license? If you deploy an image from an ISO you upload, obviously you don't get the license. Another very interesting point that I didn't realise is you can't use Mac or KMS in Azure to license these. So that's worth noting as well. And then host pool architecture, that's all around availability, and if you put a host pool in one location, what happens if you create a host pool in another location? How do you fail over? How do you do your DR? I think there's some more DR stuff later on in here. Performance and capacity is mostly all around scaling, I think, and whether you go breadth first or depth first for different situations. Host pool and session hosts, create them, automate it using PowerShell, Azure CLI, ARM and Bicep. I didn't see much of that, to be honest. I've not seen much of that in the training material, especially Bicep is almost certainly new to this exam, I think. You should obviously be using it. If you can, if you don't use a similar solution, if you don't have Terraform or whatever. But I can't really comment too much on that. The PowerShell questions, look them up on Microsoft Learn. If you don't know the PowerShell commands, Learn is there. And you can pick up some pretty easy points with the Azure CLI and PowerShell by accessing Learn in the exam. Host pool and session host settings is going to be fairly self-explanatory. And then the licensing we've already touched on. So finally in this section we've got the host images, so how to create a gold image builder. Again, I think that may be a new thing, modifying the image, lifecycle management. This is all about adding things to galleries, shared image galleries, how you would update them. The compute gallery stuff I believe was a fairly heavy point. I think there was quite a lot of that, so definitely familiarise yourself with deploying to compute galleries, when you would do a new version of an image, when you would do a new definition of an image, what the differences are between those things. So we'll come on to security, and then I'm going to try and fly through these a little bit quicker because I appreciate that the video is going on a little way. And then we're going to come on to the practice questions. We're going to maybe look at a couple of these, and then we'll have a look at this sandbox as well, which is something that I've not used before, and we'll see how that goes. So let's go through here. So the identity is whether you're using an on-prem AD or whether you're using hybrid joined boxes, whether you're using Azure Entra joined boxes. It's worth knowing the differences between those. It's very important to read the questions on these. They might say you've got an on-prem DC, they might not say you've got an on-prem DC, and also there's potentially going to be configuration questions based on that. So if you're using traditional DCs, you can configure things through group policy. If you're not, you can't, and you need to do it through Intune. If they're Intune registered, you may need to do things through ADDS group policies if you've got that option. So it's worth familiarising yourself with that kind of thing. RBAC, what can a contributor do? What can an owner do? Standard sort of RBAC-y questions. What is the minimum level of privilege you would give a user to do X, Y, and Z? So just be aware of, what roles are needed to do things that are relevant to AVD, like deploying an image to a compute gallery or taking a snapshot of a computer. How does that differ from something like management of a storage account where you need the elevated contributor role to manage it? They're all things to be familiar with. Conditional access, it should be self-explanatory if you've done any other Azure exams. Certain users want to access from a certain office. What do you need to do in the conditional access policy to allow that? MFA, again, how do you apply MFA to AVD? Do you apply it to AVD? Do you apply it to cloud? How do you configure a conditional access policy to enforce MFA when users log into Azure Virtual Desktop? Do you want it to apply when they open the RDS app? Do you want it to apply when they actually launch the desktop? And then groups, roles, and rights assignments. We don't need to stress too much about that. It's just standard stuff. And then security. How do you put Microsoft Defender on a session host? Should you be using a third-party antivirus? Should you be using an extension? Just-in-time access versus Bastion. Common sort of question format for that would be, you have an admin who RDPs to the boxes. What is an alternative? Bastion. Threat protection features, again, know what the different extensions that you can put on a session host do. And then confidential VM and trusted launch. AVD host pool. I don't remember any questions around trusted launch, but just be aware, and this is not an exam related thing, this is something that I've come across multiple times in the real world, is if you've got trusted launch VMs and then you try and deploy from a snapshot that's not trusted launch, you can't put it into the compute gallery. You have to go away and set it as trusted launch first before you can update the VM. So user environments and apps is FSLogix. We've already touched on this. How do you configure the FSLogix app on the session hosts? How do you configure profile containers? How do you configure Office containers? What are the differences? What's Cloud Cache? When would you use it? User experience. Again, this is all going to go around that group policy stuff that I mentioned earlier with, if you've got on-prem AD, do you do it through group policy? Do you do it locally on the session host? Do you do it on the host pool? There's a lot around what can be done with group policy and what can be done on the host pool directly. Universal print, how to install it, what the universal print drivers are. Intune policies, didn't get very much of. I'd expect there to be more of that in the exam now it's been updated. And then RDP properties on host pools, that's things like your device redirection, your multimedia redirection. Know what can be done through RDP, know what can be done through group policy. Session timeout, same thing. What's done on the host pool, what's done through group policy. Start virtual machine on Connect, don't know what that is. Assume that's something to do with scaling, didn't see much about that. And then personal desktops, again, difference between shared, and that kind of comes down to the RBAC and the permissions that we covered earlier. So installing and configuring apps, how do you deploy the apps? Do you install them on a gold image? Do you deliver them using MSIX? How does that work? Know about putting apps on VHDs and uploading the VHDs. How do you publish apps? Assigning apps to workspaces, all that kind of stuff. Application masking, I believe, did come up. So just sort of be aware of that, and I'd probably say use the Learn article for that one, to be honest, because it's not something that you necessarily come across every day. OneDrive Teams, how do you improve Teams performance, all that kind of stuff on there. Make sure you know your best practices for deploying Office 365 apps, ODT, and then application groups and assigning users is fairly straightforward. So finally we've got monitor and maintain. So this is log collection. Make sure you know when you need log analytics workspace, monitoring, Azure Monitor, Azure Advisor. We've touched on again. Auto scaling. This is your breadth first depth first again. How many users do you want to connect before we start going up? General Microsoft exam advice. A lot of questions are best practice around cost saving. So what is the most cost effective way to do things? Depth first, because you've only got the one VM. If you go breadth first, you might spin up 5 VMs before you start putting more users on a single one, therefore it's going to cost you more in resources. Monitor manage sessions. I haven't really seen much of that, but know how you can log off a user session. Things like drain mode, you want to push a new gold image, you don't want to disconnect users, put the thing in drain mode first before you turn it off to make sure all the sessions disappear. And then automate management of host pools. Again, that's a PowerShell question, so look up the commands if you get them and you don't know them. DR plan, I think multi-region and failover and things like that are very important to understand. How are things load balanced and backup? Just have a sort of general knowledge of Azure backup. So you need your recovery vault, what goes in the recovery vault. Be very careful around questions that say you want to back up user data and you need to back up the file share. Questions that say you want to back up your gold image versus questions that say you want to back up your actual session hosts. Just be aware of what you can back up, why you would back it up, and how you would back it up. So I'm going to come onto this sandbox. This is basically a simulation of how the exam looks. So you've got your Learn button at the side in the actual exam. We don't have it here, but there's a big button here for Microsoft Learn with the Learn logo, and then you get these same sort of things. This is a multiple choice question, so we choose an answer, and then we just press next. This is a multiple select question, so it says which 2 answers. So if we pick 2 answers, this is a drag and drop question, so this would be you've got 2 answers and you can drag and drop the answers onto the area here. Make sure you've populated all of them. If it says you need to pick 4 things and put them here, make sure you only pick 4. If it says they need to be in the correct order, make sure they're in the correct order. It's all fairly standard Microsoft exam stuff. Here's an order thing, so which 5 tasks? So we want 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We don't want too many, and then we need to make sure these are in the right order before we go on. This is one with a screenshot where you have to sort of tick in a specific thing. So this is a good reason for labbing what you're doing rather than just doing practice questions, because if you've not seen the actual menu before but you know the theory, you could trip up on this. So we can go in here and we can tick an answer in the answer box and sort of play with this window a bit. So just make sure you know what those menus look like when you go into the exam. This is just a straightforward, you've got a table and some questions about the table, so we just pick the answers based on what the table says. And then again, we've got a question about what the GUI looks like. And then we come to the case study. So the case study will give you a load of information, and then it will give you questions on very, very small subsets of that information. So for this one specifically, it says you need to recommend which System Center component must be added to System Center. So things we've got here are existing environment, and we've got System Center under there. So we can we know this is about System Center, and we know that there's a technical requirement because it says we're trying to meet the technical requirement. So we need to look at the technical requirements, and we need to know what System Center's doing. So which component should we recommend? Orchestrator, advisor, service manager, app controller. So at the moment, we can go ahead and have a look at System Center here. We can see what we already have, and then we can have a look at the technical requirements and scan that for something that says something relevant to the question. So here it says they want operation manager, and here it says they want operation manager. If we have a look in here, we can see we've got operation manager already. We'll go back to the question. We don't have anything about operation manager there, so we need to keep looking. So we go back in, keep reading this, and try and identify what is missing from the existing infrastructure compared to what the requirements are, and then pick an answer based on this. So here we've got a question with a separate exhibit. So if we click at the top, we get exhibit and it shows us a screenshot. We need to answer a question based on what the information in that screenshot is. And then on here we've got multiple exhibits. Again, we need to answer the question based on what those multiple exhibits are. So this is the kind of format that you should be expecting when you do the Microsoft exam. I think it's really handy that Microsoft give you this now, because this is so much better than doing a measure up or something like that. It shows you what the exams actually look like, and the exam will look exactly like this when you take it. So now we can come on to the practice assessment. So these are good. They do one for each exam. There's 50 questions, so it's about a third of what you get with buying a measure up, but they're actual Microsoft questions. So I mean, I'm not saying these questions are going to come up in the exam, but it's entirely possible that at the very least they're going to be very, very similar to the actual exam questions. So it is absolutely worth doing these questions and familiarising yourself with the kind of things they're answering. At the very least, you can use them to get the kind of wording that you would see in a Microsoft question. So you plan to deploy. That means you don't have a current deployment, you're planning a new one. So you don't have any current infrastructure. Network bandwidth and user experience. So we're just picking out keywords here. Which 3 factors can you identify? There's got to be 3 different answers here, so you need to tick 3 of these. Each correct answer presents a complete solution. So if it said each answer is part of a solution, it would be a different answer to complete solution. This means these will work in completely isolated ways to achieve what the goal is. So what is going to affect the network bandwidth? So you need to identify 3 factors based on that, and they're all complete solutions. So we just pick a couple of these and then do check. We get our answer here. It tells us whether we got the answer correct. It tells us whether we got the answer incorrect. And then it tells us why we got it correct or didn't get it correct. So we can see here I've picked display resolution, I've picked latency, which is wrong, I've picked network loss, and I've picked output frame rate. So now in the answer pool here, we get an answer which tells us that the frame rate and display resolution are linked. It tells us that the latency has no impact, so latency is incorrect. So it will tailor these to the answers that you pick. So network loss is detailed there, and output frame rate and display resolution are detailed there. It specifically tells us that latency is incorrect and why. If we take host pool balancing method, hopefully it will tell us we don't get a reset button, but if we pick that, hopefully it would tell us why that's incorrect. And then really helpfully, it gives us a Microsoft Learn link at the bottom. So if you do get these wrong, you can go away and you can study on why you got them wrong. So same thing here, complete solution, 2 solutions. It says you have an on-prem network and you have AD on-prem. You have an Azure subscription. So your existing environment is an on-prem domain and an Azure subscription. You're planning to deploy Azure Virtual Desktop, and it tells you how many session hosts. We don't care about how many session hosts, it's irrelevant to the question. This is just information that they've put in here to confuse you, trip you up, make you think. You know, you might go, oh, they need to communicate with the on-prem network. It's different whether there's 1 or 25. It's not. You know, just be aware what information in the question you actually need to pick out to answer the question successfully. So, on-prem network with AD, Azure. You're planning to deploy AVD, and you need to communicate between the on-prem network and Azure. There's 2 solutions, and each one is a complete solution. So we're not saying you need a virtual network gateway and a local network gateway and a site-to-site VPN. We're saying this is one solution that resolves the problem. So it's not RDP short path, it's not a VNet peer because it's not between 2 Azure networks. So we know it's site-to-site VPN and express route. If we look at these, it tells us why. So it says you can use either of these between Azure and on-prem. Peering is incorrect, and it tells you why it's incorrect here. RDP short path is incorrect, and it tells you why it's incorrect here. And then it gives you a learn link. So again, same thing. On-prem network with AD, Azure subscription. You plan to implement AVD and use RDP short path. Don't care. Doesn't matter that we're using RDP short path. You need to recommend a network connectivity solution. So all we care about is network connectivity solution between on-prem and between Azure. What would we recommend? Site-to-site VPN. Why do we recommend that? Well, it's not virtual network peering because it's not 2 networks in Azure. It's not Bastion host because that's for connecting to Azure VMs. And it's not Azure front door because that's for applications. So it's a site-to-site VPN to link the on-prem network and the Azure subscription. Check the answer. It tells you exactly why, and it meets the requirements. It's not Bastion, it's not front door, and it's not VNet peer. So again, we'll just do one more. You have AVD, so we've already got an AVD environment. Delays between input and reaction when interacting with session hosts. What's the solution to minimize user connectivity issues? So it's telling you there it's a connectivity issue, and it's manifesting in delays between input and reaction times. So we don't want to deploy a proxy server. Why would we want to do that? We don't want to disable short path because short path improves connectivity issues. That's the point of it. It's not going to be anything to do with DNS because why would it be? DNS is unrelated. What is a DSCP marker in an IP packet header? I don't actually know. In this case, I'd probably go off to Microsoft Learn and I'd look it up. But I don't feel that it can be any of these other answers. I don't see why it would be. Proxy server. It's not going to be short path, and I don't think it's anything to do with DNS. So I would go off and I would look this up and make sure that this was the correct answer. But it sounds to me like this is something to do with marking headers to stop them getting lost or stop them dropping, and it sounds like connectivity issue is packets are dropping or something's going wrong. So if we check the answer, yes. So DSCP marker is to do with quality of service. So as I said, I don't think quality of service was in the exam when I took it, so I didn't know the answer to this question. But through process of elimination, I've been able to identify what the answer is because I know what the other things are. So that's a good way of cutting down a question based on what the answers are. So if you can pick out the key points in a question and then identify what you're actually looking for and eliminate 3 of the answers, check the other answer on Microsoft Learn, you can generally get your points that way. So that's the practice assessment. Going back to the study guide, so we've covered off all the points here. You also get resources, so you've got the self-paced learning that we've already looked at. There's documentation here, which again you can access this in the exam. You can literally get to this page, and if you have a question about a host pool, you can click the how-to guide on creating a host pool, and you can follow it through and look up what the answer is. You know, you might get a question, what rights do you need to assign users to an application group? Well, it tells you there. It literally tells you in the Microsoft Learn. So while I do recommend studying as much as possible, obviously you do now have a panic button in the exam. And then there's just some change logs here, and this gives you the old pre-April 22, what the exam looked like before it was updated. So this has been the video on the 140. Hopefully I've sort of alluded to some things that you may come across in the exam. Hopefully this is helpful. I know it's been a slightly longer video, and I appreciate that it's not the most thrilling subject in the world, but hopefully this gives you enough information to go ahead and prepare for the exam. I'll do a separate video on how I actually prepare for exams generally, covering how to lab things that I do to sort of make notes and document things, the practice test that I use. Obviously this Microsoft one is very good, but I do tend to buy the measure ups because you get more questions than Microsoft give you here. And you can see my separate video as well on what to expect from a Microsoft exam that will cover off the types of questions, again, that we've looked at in this video. So hopefully this has been helpful. If you pass the exam, let me know in the comments. And if you've got any questions about specific topics, or you'd like me to make a more in-depth video on studying for any points that I've covered today in this video, please let me know. Thank you.